Peters. And in a few moments, we are expecting a hearing in the West Virginia Senate Judiciary Committee. Convention of States Action President and co-founder Mark Meckler is standing by to testify virtually via Zoom. And this is a big day for West Virginia. Our grassroots supporters from around the state are watching to see what will happen there in West Virginia. Our resolution was filed early this year, but has been sitting pending this committee hearing to move it forward. So it's an important day. 15 states have already passed our Article 5 resolution calling for a convention to propose amendments to the U.S. Constitution on 3 topics: fiscal restraints, term limits, and limitations on federal scope and jurisdiction. Basically, it's all about returning power back to the state level where the bulk of policymaking was always meant to be happening. Our Article 5 resolution is being considered this year by an additional 22 states. West Virginia is just one of these. And, it's pretty remarkable there in West Virginia, the Mountaineer state. Our resolution was introduced on both the Senate side and the House side. The Senate side is where we'll be today in the Senate Judiciary Committee with Senate Concurrent Resolution 5. And we've got 3 co-sponsors in the Senate. Over on the House side, we have 43 co-sponsors and bipartisan support. So this is a big deal, and we're expecting it to go well there. It's definitely a measure that the people of West Virginia and indeed the nation want to see this happen. A recent survey revealed that 70% of West Virginia voters across party lines are in favor of an Article 5 convention of states to propose constitutional amendments that limit federal spending, limit federal power, and establish term limits for Congress and maybe even federal judges. That would also be a possibility. So this is exactly what the West Virginia Senate Judiciary Committee is about to consider in just a few moments, and we're hoping they will get to our resolution this morning. They do have a long agenda for their meeting this morning. We are the second item on the agenda. So the meeting started at 9. They've already begun, but they have one other bill to consider before they get to us. And I am told by some of our supporters there on the ground that the chair just said if they don't finish their agenda this morning, they'll come back in to committee this afternoon. So we're not expecting it to take that long since we are second on the agenda, but you never really know what's going to happen in these committee meetings. I have seen the West Virginia Senate and House floor sessions toward the end of the session go till midnight before at the end because they have so much that they're wanting to get done. But I would submit, and I'm sure many of you watching would agree, that there's nothing those West Virginia legislators have to consider this year that's more important than they're using their authority as state legislatures under Article 5 of the Constitution to rein in our runaway federal government. So back to the survey I mentioned a few minutes ago, I mentioned that we do have bipartisan support there in the legislature in West Virginia. When we did the survey of West Virginia citizens, 76% of Republicans supported this measure that the committee will be considering today, and 65% of Democrats. So this is not a partisan issue. This is about citizens agreeing that the Constitution that the framers gave us is the right formula for the federal government, that the federal government should be one of limited, specifically enumerated powers, and that the best policy to govern the everyday lives of citizens is the policy that is made closest to home at the state and local level, not what is made in a distant, out-of-touch capital in Washington, D.C. So we're looking for a successful hearing and vote today by the Senate Judiciary Committee on our resolution in West Virginia. And if we are successful today, the next step would be a vote by the full West Virginia Senate. I should mention that we have passed our resolution through the West Virginia Senate before. It's been a couple years now, but 2 times in the past, we have gotten a favorable vote on the floor of the West Virginia Senate. And that has typically happened very quickly, usually just by a floor voice vote, which means there's, not even a roll call vote taken because there's such overwhelming support for this measure. But in the past, we have gotten stalled out over on the House side. We are very optimistic that that will not happen this year. As I said, we already have 43 legislative co-sponsors on the House side in West Virginia and bipartisan support. So we are really optimistic, and this might end up being a race in Convention of States this year to see which state will become number 16 to pass our resolution. We've already passed in 15 states, and the magic number is 34. According to the Constitution, Article 5, it takes 2/3 of the states to agree that a convention for proposing amendments is necessary. You can see this graphic here on the screen that shows you which states have already passed our resolution. Those are the green states. The states that are considering it or have filed it this year are the states that are shown in blue. And the states that are in yellow have passed the resolution through one chamber or another, but never both in the same session. Want to make sure everyone knows that under Article 5 of the Constitution, it's only the state legislature that has the power to trigger a convention for proposing amendments, because the governor, the courts, Congress, the president, they have nothing to do with this. This is the state legislatures. We need 2/3 of them, that's 34 states, to apply for a convention to propose amendments. I'd like to invite you now to make sure you stay tuned after the hearing, because we will have a quick recap, a fact check of any opponent testimony that you may hear today, and we'll have an exclusive interview with live reaction from Convention of States President and co-founder Mark Meckler. And again, Mark is standing by right now to give virtual testimony at this committee hearing via Zoom. You will probably even hear some of the committee members ask Mark questions, because he is, of course, a constitutional attorney, a scholar, and an expert on Article 5 and the law of Article 5. So he will be the one who has answers to the questions that will come up today. It looks like from our sources there on the ground that the chair has just said they are not going in order of the agenda. So we're not sure what that means as far as how long it will take for our bill to be up, but we will stay with you for the time being and hope that they get to us soon. In the meantime, I want to make sure everyone watching knows that we had an amazing victory just yesterday in the South Carolina subcommittee of the House Judiciary Committee, where they voted 3-2 to recommend passage of our resolution there in the state of South Carolina. So that's really exciting. The next step in South Carolina will be a vote by the full House Judiciary Committee, and then the resolution will move on to the floor of the South Carolina House. So as I mentioned, it's an interesting race this year among several states to see which state will become number 16. We've already passed in 15 states, and right now we've got a lot of positive action happening in South Carolina, West Virginia, where we're waiting for the committee hearing right now, and also in Wisconsin, where we have already passed committee in the Assembly and are waiting for a vote by the full Wisconsin Assembly, which could happen as early as next week. So it is an exciting year this year for Convention of States, and I think there's a real sense of urgency right now across the country as people see this new administration and how eager it is to expand federal power and to spend more and more money that is just increasing the burden on future generations. And people see and are taking notice that there is a solution to this that's provided in Article 5. It's a solution that the state legislatures can implement when they apply for a convention to propose amendments that will limit federal power, impose fiscal restraints on Washington, and establish term limits for members of Congress and even possibly federal judges. So, as I mentioned, we had a great subcommittee victory just yesterday in South Carolina. What I'd like to do, I made a lot of notes while the testimony was happening yesterday on the opponents and what they had to say. And, it's really interesting. I sort of expect we may see this again today. But what happened yesterday in South Carolina is we filled not only the committee hearing room, but also an overflow room with at least 60 grassroots citizen supporters who are just on fire for Convention of States and are ready to make sacrifices, to spend their time, their money, their energy to get to the Capitol and make sure their state legislators know that the people are ready for their representatives at the state capitol to stand up and not allow the federal government to continue on the overreaching course that it has been on for so long now to the detriment of our country. But what was interesting to see was, okay, we have all of these South Carolina citizens there. They are the ones being represented, of course, by the legislators at the Capitol. The opponents, however, most of whom were there via Zoom. I think there were only one, maybe two who were actually there in the room, but almost all of them, if not all of them, were from out of state. They were not even citizens of South Carolina. And so the state legislators need to keep in mind that while it's helpful to hear from experts on the law of Article 5 and the history of Article 5, experts like Mark Meckler, it's not necessarily helpful for them to hear from folks who are there from out of state who have no particular expertise on the subject, who haven't written books about it, haven't studied the law on it. It's not particularly helpful for those folks to be showing up because they're not the ones represented by the legislators who are there to consider the resolution. So again, I want to go back and mention some of the things that we heard from the opponents yesterday. First of all, it's always kind of weird to see some of the opponents, especially those from the John Birch Society, like to spend a lot of time trying to convince everyone that the 1787 Constitutional Convention, where our amazing, wonderful Constitution was born, was a runaway convention. They're really interested in convincing people of that. And that used to be sort of the common misconception, was that our Constitution was the result of a runaway convention. But that idea has been completely debunked by scholarly research that actually examined the commissions of those who were sent to represent their states at the 1787 convention. And I just think it's really disturbing that you have people who claim to revere our founding fathers who are just dead set on just dishonoring the legacy of the founders by suggesting that they were dishonorable people who went to represent their states and acted without authority. And, that would be really disturbing to the great founding fathers who created our Constitution, this idea that they had betrayed the trust that their states had put in them in sending them to the convention. So it's really disturbing to hear these people come out at almost every committee hearing we have and really just slander the founding fathers. Another misconception that was trotted out there by some of the opponents at the South Carolina subcommittee hearing yesterday was that constitutional amendments have nothing to do with correcting abuses of power. So they sort of suggest that the entire amendment process in Article 5 was just meant maybe to correct some sort of technical errors, misspellings or something like that. And of course, that's just ridiculous. Constitutional amendments have been used to correct abuses of power or wrong balances of power. They have been used to correct wrong Supreme Court decisions. And that was always what was intended by the founders. Article 5, the Convention of States process, was always meant to act as a check on federal power, to give the states a means of reining in an out-of-control federal government. And the records from the convention, James Madison's notes on the convention, are very clear on that point, that the whole point of the Article 5 convention process was to create a way for the states to bypass Congress if they needed to get needed amendments that would correct the balance of power and restore or add limitations on federal power. Evan Mulch, one of the other opponents at the subcommittee hearing yesterday, claimed, well, the problem is just that congressmen don't obey the Constitution. But, the problem with that was really laid bare by Mark Meckler, COS co-founder and president, when he pointed out that the Constitution that is followed today in Washington, D.C. is not this one. It's not the pocket Constitution that fits in our pocket and is the original plan of the founders with the Bill of Rights and the constitutionally adopted amendments. The Constitution that is obeyed today in Washington is a 3,000-page perversion of this document. It's not all perversion, but a lot of it. There on your screen, you can see the pocket Constitution on top. That's the original Constitution, plus the duly enacted amendments. The book on the bottom that you can tell is very heavy, the voluminous book, is what's called the Constitution Annotated. And it contains all of these Supreme Court opinions that have, quote unquote, interpreted the provisions of the original Constitution. And that's the problem we have today in Washington, is that much of the Constitution has been perverted and wrongly interpreted by Congress, by the executive, and by the Supreme Court. And the only way to definitively correct those perversions, those wrong interpretations, the only way to correct bad precedents from the Supreme Court is for us to use this Article 5 Convention of States process to propose amendments that will set things right. So the problem isn't just that congressmen don't obey the Constitution. That's just a gross simplification. What happens in Washington, D.C. is that the bureaucrats, the feds, the politicians, they lawyer around the Constitution and they obey it according to what the Supreme Court has said they can get away with. I also want to note one of the opponents, I think it was Evan Mulch, kept talking about Congressman Ralph Norman and how proud he was of Congressman Ralph Norman for getting a good score on their Liberty Index. And it's interesting to note that this Congressman Ralph Norman is an endorser of the Convention of States process because he's there in Washington and can see that limits imposed from the outside are the only way to rein in our federal government. A lot of the opponents yesterday, and again, these are mostly out-of-state people. These are not the citizens of South Carolina coming out to oppose the Convention of States resolution. These are special interests from outside the state, by and large. And some of them relied on what's called a Congressional Research Service report and sort of acted like, whatever it says in those CRS reports is the law of the land according to how an Article 5 convention would operate. The truth is those reports carry no precedential value. They carry no legal weight or authority. So anything they're quoting from those CRS reports are just not authoritative. They're not convincing. They cannot be relied on. So we saw the League of Women Voters represented among the opponents yesterday in South Carolina. And one thing she said was, constitutional scholars have said that an Article 5 convention to propose amendments would put the Constitution at great risk. Well, that just isn't so. That is outdated information. It is true that back, 30, 40 years ago, there was a wave of scholars saying, oh, this is dangerous. We don't know how an Article 5 convention would work. We don't know if it would be limited. But that just has been completely debunked and disproven by the more recent scholarly research of true experts like Professor Robert Natelson. And I'm going to grab this book that Professor Natelson wrote, The Law of Article 5 on State Initiation of Constitutional Amendments. And it's extremely well researched and documented. It's footnoted, and it cites a number of cases where Article 5 questions have been considered and decided by the courts, and they always refer back to the historical meaning of Article 5, as well as the actual practice of interstate conventions. And while there's never in American history been an Article 5 convention, there have in American history been a number of interstate conventions where the states would gather together and meet and discuss problems and come up with solutions. And we can use those past interstate conventions to know and understand how an Article 5 convention would work. Because an Article 5 convention for proposing amendments is just a specific type of interstate convention where the states get together and meet. What's interesting is that in the research that Professor Natelson, who by the way was a law professor for about 25 years, in the research that he's done in this book, one of the things his research revealed is that all the big important parts of an interstate convention always worked the same way. For instance, every state always got one vote. So sometimes we'll hear opponents say, Well, when we go to convention, the big states like California will have way more voting power than the smaller states. So states like California will be the ones to decide what comes out of convention. Well, that's just not true, because in all the interstate conventions in American history, voting has been on the basis of one state, one vote. That's always the way it works. And this is exactly why this is such a great tool for the states to be using right now. It really gives the states power. I'm seeing some questions come up on Facebook. We have passed our resolutions so far in 15 states. West Virginia today is hoping to be number 16 by having this hearing in the Senate Judiciary Committee. But we've already passed in 15 states, and 34 is the number of states required in order to trigger a convention that can propose amendments that would impose fiscal restraints on Washington, limit federal power and jurisdiction, and establish term limits for members of Congress and possibly even for federal judges or bureaucrats. Imagine how our federal system could be restored if we could do those things. It would really just be incredible. Another thing that the League of Women Voters pointed out at the hearing yesterday in South Carolina was that, well, wait, South Carolina receives money from the federal government. So you don't want that money to stop coming in. So you better, not be in favor of this convention to propose amendments. But, that's exactly the kind of thinking that has gotten our country to the point we are now, where we're in fiscal crisis. The federal spending is the spending of taxpayer dollars. The federal government doesn't have a magic money tree. They're spending our money. Every dollar they spend is coming from us. And right now, there's no meaningful limitation on federal spending, because the federal government has interpreted the General Welfare Clause to mean that Congress can spend money on any project that it thinks is a good idea. That's a big problem. We need the states to use their authority under Article 5 to rein in the runaway federal government and to impose meaningful limitations on federal spending. So I'm going to pause here for a moment, and we are going to check in and see what's happening there in the West Virginia Senate Judiciary Committee. And we'll be right back to you, hopefully in just a moment, to bring you coverage of the West Virginia Senate Judiciary Committee hearing. Well, hello, everyone. We are back with you. I am Rita Peters. I am the Senior Vice President for Legislative Affairs with Convention of States Action. And this is a special edition of our COS Live program because in Charleston, West Virginia this morning, there is a Senate Judiciary Committee hearing underway right now. And our Convention of States resolution is on the agenda for discussion. Right now, they are considering a bill that is ahead of us on the agenda. So we have just been sort of talking about some of the things that have happened recently with the Convention of States project and some of our recent successes. It is certainly an exciting year for Convention of States as the new administration in the White House and the Congress are just heightening the concerns of citizens that the federal government has just grown too large, too overbearing, and it's time for the states to use their constitutional authority to rein in the feds. So we'll be going to the hearing in just a few minutes as soon as they get finished with their current business and move on to discussion about our Convention of States resolution. I should note that Convention of States co-founder and president Mark Meckler is standing by to testify via Zoom. And so you will not want to miss that. It doesn't get any better than Mark Meckler when it comes to giving testimony for these committees. And it's likely that he will get some questions and have a chance to answer questions from committee members and maybe even to respond to some of the opposition arguments, which have all been responded to before. So there's nothing new that comes up and excuse me, from the opposition. It's all the same. All the questions have been answered. All the arguments have been refuted. And folks, the only thing that remains for the opposition is to peddle their fear of some sort of irrational, never before happened, unprecedented runaway convention, which is just, it's kind of like deciding you're not going to go outside your house today because the sun could collapse and hit you or something. It's just irrational. So it's always interesting to hear those arguments and to note how they don't hold water, and yet they're repeated hearing after hearing, and it gets to be frustrating. So I want to tell you a little bit about news from across the country on Convention of States. Yesterday, our Article 5 resolution passed the South Carolina House Judiciary Subcommittee on Constitutional Law by a vote of 3-2. It now heads to the full Judiciary Committee for a vote. You're seeing a picture of the crowd that gathered at this hearing yesterday. It was really impressive with at least 60 people. And I'm going to walk away, let you look at that for just a moment while I see if I can gather some more information about what's happening there in the West Virginia committee room. It looks like we are still on a previous bill and just waiting for ours to come up. Everybody is waiting to testify. And yeah, it's going to be an exciting day in West Virginia. So as I was saying before, South Carolina House Judiciary Subcommittee on Constitutional Laws passed our resolution by a vote of 3-2. And that is now heading to the full Judiciary Committee for a vote. So you're looking at a picture of the overflow room where South Carolina citizens, people like you and me, spent their day amidst a tornado warning in South Carolina, I'm told. They spent their day traveling to the Capitol in order to let their legislators know that they support the Convention of States resolution and wanted their state legislators to pass that resolution. Last Monday, the Missouri House Committee on General Laws passed a resolution that would remove the sunset clause on the COS resolution. And so that was a big moment too. Now, Missouri is one of our 15 states that have already passed the resolution through both chambers. So it is one of the 15 on our way to 34 states. But when Missouri passed the resolution, they included in theirs what's known as a sunset clause. That means that the resolution is good for a number of years, but then would expire. And so what's exciting is last week, the vote to remove that sunset clause was overwhelmingly positive. It was a vote of 11-4. And if passed through both chambers, Missouri would continue to count toward the 34 states needed to call the convention. So onward, Missouri. I know that our grassroots army there in Missouri is working hard to make sure that happens. Last Wednesday, we passed in the Wisconsin Assembly Committee on Constitution and Ethics by a vote of 5-4. And we're looking for a vote on the floor, the full assembly, as early as next week. So Wisconsin is really in this race to be state number 16. Will it be Wisconsin? Will it be South Carolina? Or will it be West Virginia? We'll see. West Virginia is hoping to take the next step toward that road toward number 16 today with the Senate Judiciary Committee vote. Now, I'll remind you that we are standing by, waiting for the Senate Judiciary Committee to be on our resolution. They are considering a bill that's prior to ours on the agenda right now. As soon as they get to our bill, I will stop talking and we will transition so that you can watch our live coverage of that hearing. And what we expect to happen is they will allow public testimony. Our Convention of States president and co-founder, Mark Meckler, is standing by to testify via Zoom. I don't know yet whether there are others who will testify for or against, but generally what happens is the committee members will then ask questions of Mark Meckler, as he is an attorney and, of course, an expert on Article 5. So you'll get to see Mark testify and most likely answer questions. I have been warned by our folks on the ground there in West Virginia that it is possible that if the committee hearing runs long this morning, they may have to leave the committee, go into their floor session, and then come back to the committee after the floor session to vote. So while we do expect to hear at least some testimony and questions and answers in the committee hearing this morning, it's possible that we will not get to see the vote or know about the vote until later this afternoon. We'll see. I am still pulling for the hearing and vote to happen during our coverage of this event. The other day, I do have to pass on some bad news because I'm telling you everything, not just our successes, but also where we've had setbacks. The other day, the Wyoming Senate rejected the Convention of States resolution by a very narrow 14-16 vote. But the team is not discouraged. They are continuing doing town halls to educate both citizens and legislators about Article 5 and the convention process. They have been on the radio. There was even at least one billboard in Wyoming to alert people to the issue, because the citizens need to know that there is reason for hope. There is something we can do. We're all tired of sending people that we mostly think are the right people to Washington. Year after year, we vote and we sit back and watch and we read the news, and we end up feeling like our vote didn't really matter because whoever we send to Washington just gets plugged into this process. And they, we don't know if they're drinking the Kool-Aid or what it is that happens, but we end up feeling like our voices are not heard or not heeded because the federal government just continues to amass more and more power, more and more control over our daily lives. And that's not what we want, because we understand as regular people who work hard to provide for our families, we know that the best policies are the ones that are made closest to home. And this Article 5 convention process is the way. I believe it's the only peaceful way right now to restore our federal system and to set things right in Washington. So far this year, 22 states have introduced the Convention of States resolution. I'm just going to rattle off the list, and you can look at the graphic here and go along with me, but it's an impressive list, folks. It's Hawaii, Illinois, Iowa, Kansas, Kentucky, Maine, Maryland, Massachusetts, Minnesota, Montana, Nebraska, New Hampshire, New Jersey, North Carolina, South Dakota, Vermont, Virginia, Washington, West Virginia, Wisconsin, and Wyoming. Those are the states that have introduced the Convention of States resolution so far this year. 15 states have already passed our Article 5 resolution. Those are the ones you see in this map on the screen in green, and they include Georgia, Alaska, Alabama, Florida, Indiana, Louisiana, Oklahoma, Tennessee, North Dakota, Arizona, Missouri, Texas, Arkansas, Mississippi, and Utah. And we're very pleased. I think this news just came in yesterday, y'all. Mark Meadows has just endorsed the Convention of States project. Here's a picture of Representative Meadows. He represented North Carolina's 11th district from 2013 to 2020, and more recently served in President Trump's White House as the chief of staff. During his time in Congress, Representative Meadows helped found the House Freedom Caucus to fight for conservative, limited government issues, and he's been a staunch defender of liberty throughout his career. Now he's thrown his considerable influence behind the Convention of States effort. Here's a quote from him. Joe Biden and Congress continue to push a leftist agenda, even encouraging rule changes to force their will on the American people. It is time for state legislatures to use their constitutional leverage and pass a Convention of States resolution. Excuse the dogs barking. And Mark Meadows continued, it's time to rein in the power of career politicians. Mark Meckler, president of Convention of States Action and co-founder, said, we couldn't be happier to have the endorsement of a champion of liberty like Representative Meadows. He said Representative Meadows has a proven track record of advocating for fiscal responsibility and limited government, whether in President Trump's White House or as a conservative leader in Congress. His love for his country is clear, and we're excited to welcome him to the Article 5 movement. That was a quote from Mark Meckler about Mark Meadows' recent endorsement of Convention of States. Now, Representative Meadows joins dozens of other national leaders, thinkers, and legal experts in endorsing the Convention of States project, including Mark Levin, Ben Shapiro, Sean Hannity, Governor Ron DeSantis, Ben Carson, and many, many others. If you're watching today and you're wondering how you can help this effort, how you can get involved, go to conventionofstates.com. Start by signing our petition if you haven't already, and then share the petition with your friends and family. And please don't stop there, but join the Convention of States team in your state. We have grassroots-led volunteer teams of self-governing citizen activists in all 50 states. So it doesn't matter which state you are in, it's time to join. You know, we like to say on COS Live, if you're looking for the person to help save the republic, look in the mirror, because it starts with you. Citizenship is a duty. It is a responsibility. You know, with our freedom comes responsibility. So it's never enough to sit back and watch. It's not a spectator sport. It's not okay to sit back and complain and shake your head and wring your hands when you're disappointed with what's happening in Washington, because you have a role to play. And we need every one of you to join with this effort, join your state team, and be part of the solution. Conventionofstates.com is that website. We also have a lot of resources there. If you're ready to take the next step and be active and help make this happen in your state, there's all kinds of information that you can read. It gives you instructions for how to talk to a legislator, how to talk to your friends and family, how to help us spread the word. And I want to mention that as part of your state team, there are all kinds of different roles that you can play. One of the most important roles for citizens to play as part of this movement is to become a district captain. This is the person who's really in charge of coordinating the self-governing citizen activists in their own state house district with the larger state strategy that's being put together by the volunteer state leaders in conjunction with our national team, which provides resources to really support the citizen volunteers in every state. So there is a job for you to do. If you say, well, I want to be part of this, but I'm not really good with crowds, I'm not really a people person, making phone calls and giving presentations isn't really my thing. There are so many other roles you can play, from writing a letter to the editor to simply showing up for a committee hearing or a town hall and wearing a Convention of States button. There are so many ways that you can have an impact for the good of the future of this country. I'm going to take another break here. We really are expecting the Senate Judiciary Committee in West Virginia to move on to consider a resolution any minute now, but I'm going to take a quick break and check in with our folks on the ground and hopefully be back to you very soon with live coverage of the West Virginia Senate Judiciary Committee hearing on our Convention of States resolution. Stay tuned. Well, hello, everybody. This is Rita Peters back to you on this special edition of COS Live, as we have been for the past hour waiting for our Convention of States resolution to be heard and considered by the West Virginia Senate Judiciary Committee. So it's an important day there in West Virginia. Unfortunately, I've just gotten word from our folks on the ground there in West Virginia that the committee had to temporarily adjourn to go into their floor session, which apparently started at the top of the hour. But it's not over for us. The day is far from over there in West Virginia, and they will be coming back into the committee room this afternoon. We're expecting that to be around 2:00 p.m. Eastern. So we will still have live coverage of the hearing, and I hope everyone will come back to join us this afternoon, because we're expecting a victory there in West Virginia in the Senate Judiciary Committee. And here's a little bit of inside scoop. Our folks there on the ground heard one of the committee members who is believed to be an opponent of Convention of States say that he was not going to vigorously oppose us this year. So I'm not sure if he's had a change of heart. Maybe one of his constituents has convinced him that opposing Convention of States is the wrong thing to do. But it's an interesting development in the West Virginia situation. So I'm going to sign off for now, and I hope that you all can join us later for live committee hearing and testimony in the West Virginia Senate Judiciary Committee on Senate Concurrent Resolution 5, which is our Convention of States resolution for an Article 5 convention to propose amendments that would impose fiscal restraints on the federal government, limit the power and jurisdiction of the federal government, and set term limits for members of Congress and perhaps even federal judges and bureaucrats. So that's all for now. Thanks for tuning in, and we hope